This is a summary version of what we were doing with dynamic constraints today, and this is how I should have done it if I had thought the process through a little bit better. For brevity, I've already made a model with several segments, and I've put a chain of bones in here. Each of these bones is a child of the one above it, and by default it is attached to parents. So we have one continuous chain of bones here that we'll be able to apply our constraint to. I'm going to close that window. And I have also put that model in a core already, and I have animated it to go from side to side 3 times. And we'll use that motion to test our dynamic constraint that we're about to make. I'm going to go back to the model here. I'm going to right click on the name of the model and choose New, Pose, Percentage. Normally we put a constraint in an on-off pose, but in this case I'm going to do it in percentage because of something we want to try later. So here's my new pose. I'm going to choose the last bone in the chain, right click on it, do New Constraint, Dynamic Constraint. And that will hopefully make this whole chain behave like a floppy chain of bones. I'm going to go into the properties here and change just a few defaults on this. I'm going to change the stiffness to just 25%, so it's obviously floppy. I'm going to change the drag to 20%, just so it's not completely flying all over the place. And I'm going to change the angle limit on these bones to 90. So the maximum that any of these bones can twist is 90 degrees instead of all the way around. I'm going to close that relationship and go back to our choreography here. I'm going to, let's see, will this play? Nope, I need to close my objects folder. And now I can hit play, and it does nothing because I didn't turn the pose on in the object. Let's do it here so it's on by default. I'll turn it up to 100%. That should count as on. Let's watch this again. There we go. So there is a reasonably floppy chain of bones. We had originally thought, or at least I had originally thought, that we could make another pose slider that would vary the effect of that constraint by varying the enforcement of the constraint, and that didn't work out real well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to modify this pose. Let's get our relationship back there so we can edit it. And I'm going to modify it so that it's completely stiff at 100% and completely unstiff at 0%. The first thing I have to do is modify the enforcement so that it's always on. Notice, watch this enforcement number here. It's only on at all when this is all the way over to 100%. So I'm going to move my pose slider here over to 0 and make this 100. So now, no matter where we put this pose slider, this pose is always going to be on. The other thing I want to do is I want to keyframe the stiffness. So here, while I have my pose at 0%, I'm going to set the stiffness to 0. And then I'm going to move it over to 100%. And I'm going to set the stiffness to 100. And let's see if I move it. There we go. So I move this down. That number is decrementing. So I should be able to control the stiffness of this object while it's animating in the core by making keyframes on just this one pose slider. Now I've noticed some of these other numbers are changing. The ones the drag and the angle limit, those are only staying at the numbers I set when I have this at 100. This is sort of the same situation. I want this drag to always be at 20%, just for the purposes of this experiment so we don't have too many variables. So I'm going to set this to 20. And now when I move this back and forth, that should stay at 20 all the time. And it does. Likewise, for that angle limit, I want that to always be 90 for the purposes of this experiment. And so when I move my pose slider here, that always stays at 90. The only variable we're going to be changing now is the stiffness in our choreography. So let's close that. Let's force a save. To make sure that new constraint is recognized, or those changes are recognized. I'm going to close this objects folder. And let's see here. Go down. Let's look at our properties here. Okay, there's our pose slider. I never named it, but I should have. But right now it's set to the default 100 stiffness it has in the model. If I play this through, we are indeed seeing 100% stiffness. So let's change this at the beginning to 0% stiffness. This should be very floppy. Let's see what happens. There we go. So that's 0%. If I wanted to change that during the course of the animation, let's see, there's the first pass, there's the second pass, here's the third pass. Let's make it start out with 100% stiffness. And then after the first pass, and it has had time to settle down, let's move it up to, let's say, 75. Well, let's do 50. See what we get. 50% stiffness. And then after it's done the second one, let's move it to 0% stiffness. I want these amounts to stay constant when they're set. See how as I scrub through that, this number is changing. So I'm just going to select these keyframes. And on my keyboard above the letters, I'm going to hit the number 7. Or no, I want 7. Yeah, that forces this to be a stair step. Ooh, one of these didn't work. Oh, I started at 0. I wanted this to be 100, didn't I? There we go. So we're going from 0% stiffness to 50% stiffness to 100% stiffness for the last pass. Let's see what we got. This should be 0. Let me try that again. Let's go back to the beginning here. Okay, this should be 0% stiffness. There we go. Now 50% stiffness is much stiffer, and here's 100 coming up. There we go. 0. And 100% stiff. So we have successfully changed the amount of stiffness of that model, of the dynamic constraint in that model, by keyframing these values in the core. That is what we tried to do today, and now we've done it. I return you to your regular program.